For Bari Weiss it was bound to end like this, sung out by competing outrage armies. For her critics it was a long overdue good riddance to one of the New York Times' most polarizing and anger-inducing opinion writers. For her defenders it was one of the latest examples of cancel culture run amok. By the time of her departure, she hadn't even been writing all that much, and yet she was arguably the paper's most notorious opinion journalist, shorthand for an entire debate about wokeness and free thinking. By raging against her, the Twitter left expanded her profile to an enormous size. But wherever you land on the endlessly controversial subject of Bari Weiss, her resignation letter to Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger, posted Tuesday on her personal website after Vice reported that she had left the company, was a sight to behold. "I was hired with the goal of bringing in voices that would not otherwise appear in your pages, first-time writers, centrists, conservatives and others who would not naturally think of the Times as their home," she wrote. Instead, a new consensus has emerged in the press, but perhaps especially at this paper, that truth isn't a process of collective discovery, but an orthodoxy already known to an enlightened few whose job is to inform everyone else. The letter went on to excoriate Times leadership for what Weiss portrayed as deference to the social media mobs. Twitter is not on the masthead of the New York Times. But Twitter has become its ultimate editor. As the ethics and mores of that platform have become those of the paper itself has increasingly become a kind of performance space. Stories are chosen and told in a way to satisfy the narrowest of audiences, rather than to allow a curious public to read about the world and then draw their own conclusions. I was always taught that journalists were charged with writing the first rough draft of history. Now, history itself is one more ephemeral thing molded to fit the needs of a predetermined narrative. Sulzberger and executive editor Dean Baquet both declined to comment on those charges, but it's safe to say that Times management would disagree. The Times, its brass would argue, isn't afraid to piss off the right or the left or anyone in between, as evidenced by the equal opportunity firestorms in which it so often finds itself engulfed. Nevertheless, Weiss's defiant resignation comes at a particularly sensitive moment both at 628th Avenue and in the culture wars at large, as digital wildfires proliferate over the push and pull between acceptable speech and the inexorable currents of social change that are washing over America. As the Times noted last week in its own coverage of the shitstorm that resulted from the now infamous Letter on Justice and Open Debate, published by Harper's, artists and writers warn of an intolerant climate. Reaction is swift. Tensions along these lines have been percolating within the Times for the past couple of years.